يا الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome everybody. Inshallah, today we'll start hopefully on page 115. So we've got a completely new concept here that's being introduced with regards to idgham, the meeting of the two letters. I just thought probably before starting, I'll probably ask a question to anybody in the group, you can ask or find out what is the definition of idgham that you already know.
The basic definition is to merge the two letters, merging one letter into another one.
No, it's perfect. Jazakallah khair, man. Like, if you can give an example just to kind of demonstrate, that'd be perfect.
The example is like we have in the book as well, like إِذْ ظَلَمْتُمْ or قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ
Yes, that's perfect.
يَا أَثْقَلَ الدَّعْوُ.
No, alhamdulillah. So that's basically how it is in brief. We're not going to overcomplicate it, and that's what it sounds like. So what we'll try to get covered today is hopefully explaining the different types of idgham, and we'll probably cover the basic and probably the more advanced concepts today. So feel free to stop us if you have any questions, inshallah.
So
Go
like
ahead,
to
bro.
start like it means we studied last time in a different topic, not here, somewhere else. Like Rab is also the same. That's why Ba and Bar. So it's the same with the Ram, right? Rab,
What do you
Rabba,
mean?
like
If you can give us an
Rabba,
example.
Rabbu, same, yeah. Like Mimma, Rabbu. It's all in the Ram, right? Ba and
Oh,
Bar
yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, inshallah. So what we'll do today basically is break them down in detail and talk about the different types of idgham. So just for everybody to bear in mind, we're going to give the generic idgham rules. These happen regardless of qira'ah that you're doing. And then there's really specific ones for Hafs. So the ones, just as a reminder, we're covering is for the most famous qira'ah, which is the recitation of Hafs. The reason that I mentioned this is that obviously in other advanced styles, you have different types of idgham and different letters merged together. The guideline that we have with this, apart from Tajweed, is the fact that Tajweed is based on the language of the Arabs, and reason being is that the Arabs back in the days, they like to merge these letters together based on their dialect. For example, Arabs in the past, with the ease of recitation or even talking to somebody, they never say man yaqul. They always say may yaqul. So you'll find this not just in Arabic, you'll find this in other dialects as well, in other languages. So here we'll be, inshallah, trying to maybe cover the rules of that. So feel free to stop me if you have any questions. So inshallah, without any further ado, we'll just grab anybody to head start the qira'ah and we'll carry on, inshallah.
I will start, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, bro. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so we are on page number 115, meeting
Yes.
the two letters, Al-Harfanul Multaqayan.
Yep.
So number one is concept is idgham. Idgham, linguistically insertion. Arab says adghamatu, the bridle into the horse mouth. That is, I have inserted it into its mouth. They also say adghamatu, the sword into its sheath. That is, I have inserted it. And its definition is applied definition. It is joining a non-vowel letter with a vowel letter so that they become one stress letter of the type of the second. The articulation point is lifted from its position as one movement as in. Examples are wal yaktub bainakum,
Yes.
hammat ta'ifatani. Shall I proceed for the identical one or all good?
Yeah, carry on.
Okay, the second one is the two identical letters. There are two letters which have the same articulation point and the same characteristics. So when two identical letters meet, the first being non-vowel, and it is not a lengthening letter, idgham is required, as in وَقَدْ وَقَدْ دَخَلُوا بَلْ لَا تُكْرِمُونَ يُدْرِكُكُمْ يُكْرِهُنَّ. In this case, the first is vowel or it is a lengthening letter. There shall be no idgham, as in يَعْلَمُ مَا فِي يَوْمٍ isbiru wasabiru.
Okay, just a pause here. So the most important thing to differentiate, I'm just going to make sure that we understand this from the page. Does anybody understand what is meant here by we're talking about the same characteristics and articulation points? So what's characteristic and what's articulation point? Just to translate that in simple terms. Because this is going to come really in handy in explaining the different types of idgham.
What I can see, like ba is, and another one like bayinakum, it's the same word, and second is like hammat taifatani. So both ta and ta are from the same articulation point, like makhraj are from the same.
Yes. So ideally, if we had to maybe do our own definition to make it easier, what's a makhraj, articulation point, and what's a sifa or a characteristic? We're kind of revising the old chapters as well, but this is going to be really critical in this section. Okay, I'll ask probably a different question. Is it possible for a letter to have the same characteristic or articulation point as another letter?
I'm not sure actually. Like I was just thinking, like maybe it will be answered, like, but we can see in the example, like both are from the same articulation point, but when you join, then which you have to say it like we will be pronouncing ta or ta, if different. This is the one
Yeah.
you are looking for, or
So the example, let's use an example we covered earlier. So we said idgham basically is insert something into something else. So basically what this means is, let's just say the example they gave in the book is like you're having a sword. So when you insert the sword into the sheath, do you see the reflective metal, or is it completely hidden?
It's hidden.
Yes. So obviously, maybe at the initial stage you see it, but as you push the sword down into the sheath and locks into place at the hilt, what happens in this case is basically it completely disappears. So that's what happens in the process of merging. So let's look at the simplest example. So may yaqulu. So may yaqulu, we said you got a noon sakina, and you got it's mim noon man yaqulu. So it's merging two words. Now, the most basic idgham is, we said, the one, and you see this in Tuhfat al-Atfal. This is actually before you cover this book. It's actually found in Al-Jazariya, explains it really well. So basically, Tuhfat al-Atfal basically says you got, if there's a noon sakin or tanween followed by any letter of yarmilun, ya, ra, lam, mim, waw, noon, they merge. So the best example when I tell people to merge letters is that in order to make it easier for them to pronounce, I'll say drop the first letter that you're merging, because this letter is going to disappear, just like the sword and the sheath example. So the noon sakin or the tanween is going to disappear, but it's not going to disappear completely. It's going to disappear into the next letter. So that's why I say may yaqulu. So effectively, idgham is, in this case, you're dropping the letter of interest, which is the first letter, and you're merging it into the second letter, which is visible. Just like how you can see the sheath or the leather case or whatever it is you're hiding the sword in, that is basically the second letter. So is that a good explanation of Yarmilun and how idgham works? Just as a general overview. Anyone got any questions about that?
All good.
Oh, good. Perfect. So that's idgham in its simplest concept. So we basically say if any of the idgham letters comes, there's 5 letters, and you got a nun sakin or tanween, you merge them. Now you're moving into the advanced idgham. So what happens is that you've got basically وَلْيَكْتُبْ بَيْنَكُمْ, as you found in Ayat al-Dain, which is the longest ayah in the Quran. Here you have ليكتب, and the next letter is ba, بينكم. So it's 2 letters. The question I asked the audience, are they from the same makhraj? The same articulation point? Yes.
Same, both are ba, yeah.
Ba,
Yes, exactly. So they're from the same makhraj, the same articulation point, and they have the same sifa. So in this case, they're completely identical. So from an Arabic sense, it doesn't make common sense to try to separate letters when they have exactly identical properties. You never hear, and then make qalqala as well, which is even more complicated. You don't hear somebody say وَلْيَكْتُبَ بَيْنَكُمْ بَيْنَهُم. Oh, sorry, وَلْيَكْتُبْ بَيْنَكُمْ كَاتِبٌ لَا. You can't say وَلْيَكْتُبَ بَيْنَكُمْ. It's just easy to say لَكْتُبْ بَيْنَكُمْ قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ, like we've said before. So in this case, because the articulation point, and you can write this in squares if you want to write it as a table, it'll make it easier for you to remember. In one section, write down the letters are identical and the sifat are identical. So that's basically when you fully merge. So just to recap, the general case of idgham, you've got the letters of Yarmilun. That's what we said for Hafs. The 5 letters, if they come afterwards, you mention. This is the special, in this page, however, we're covering the special type of idgham. This is the exceptional idgham that's allowed based on the fact that the letters are very, mashallah, as you demonstrated, they're very similar, or they have very similar characteristics or articulation points. So mashallah, Imam Hafs takes that into account, and for the easy pronunciation, he makes idgham of those as well. And obviously there are different criteria. So the first one we explained is the one where the makhraj is identical and the sifa is identical. You do have other cases where basically the makhraj is identical, but the sifa is very close. That is known as mutaqaribain, or very close in that case. So obviously it's you do the same rule of idgham, but it's just given a different classification. So because like we said, may yaqulu is different to liyaktub baynakum, because we said one relies on the same makhraj, and one is closer to the makhraj or the articulation point than the other. You see where I'm coming from? That's why they have to be in different levels. You guys see where I'm coming from? Any questions about the different levels of idgham? No questions? Okay. So the question is, now I'm going to ask, what does the Sheikh mean here by al-harfain al-mutamathilain, or the 2 identical letters? That's the section where we just read in 115. If I get harfain mutamathilain, or the 2 identical letters, idgham wise, how does it sound? Is it partial, fully? What is it?
One is
Fully.
dropped completely.
Go ahead.
One is dropped completely.
Yes. So in order to execute it, I have to drop the first one and I merge it to the second one. And what happens when the letters are identical? If they have the same articulation points and the same characteristics, is it basically the strongest type of idgham, or is it a lower level idgham?
So there will be a stress, means it's a strong.
Yes, yeah. So that's basically something to remember. So as we said, if you're going to have a grid with 4 squares, the strongest one is going to be if the articulation point is exactly the same, and if the sifa of the 2 letters is exactly the same. And the example here the Sheikh gives, you can tell are identical letters. وَقَدْ دَخَلُوا. If you got 2 letters that are the same, then you're allowed to merge them based on that criteria. وَقَدْ دَخَلُوا. You don't say وَقَدْ دَخَلُوا. You say بَلْ لَا تُكْرِمُونَ. It fully merges in. You drop the first one, as Brother Asar said, and you fully merge into it as if it's one identity. Example, you see, this is what يُدْرِكُمُ الْمَوْتِ. You don't say it's hard to say يُدْرِكُكُمُ الْمَوْتِ, especially when the next one's a shadda. So it's يُكْرِهُنَّ is going to be difficult. So just remember, if you get mutamathilain, Arabic means the same or identical. This is basically where the characteristic, the makhraj is the same, articulation point, and the sifa is the same. The question is based on what we already know now about sifat, and I ask this question again because now it's going to make sense to all of us. Is it possible to have a letter with one or two letters that have the same sifa or characteristic?
Yes, I think
Like
by sift you mean like tafkhim, tarqiq, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a generic sifa. I'm talking about specific sifat. Like, remember when we talked about, we said itbaq, حروف الصفير, the whistling letters, حروف الشدة, the letters that are strong, حروف البينية, in between letters. Is it possible to get some letters like a Venn diagram? They're going to overlap over some other letters.
Yep.
So that's perfect. So as we said, if the letters come from the same makhraj and have the same sifa, that's the strongest type of idgham. There are situations that are different. And obviously, as the letters, obviously you've got letters that merge together, but as their sifat, characteristics, and articulation point, which is the pronunciation point, as these 2 points start diverging from each other, then the idgham will start getting weaker. Does that make sense? Yeah. You guys get where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, because when you think about it, think of it this way: idgham means to merge. So if the articulation points and the sifat are close to each other, then it's going to be easy to merge them. Think of it as chemistry. If they all come from the same source, it's easier to merge them. If the more they spread away from each other, and the more they come from somewhere different, then at the end of the day, what basically happens, it becomes harder to merge them. So just remember that, yeah? So based on what Brother Isra said, you can get more than one sifa. And some of the sifat overlap, and some of them diverge. Some of them, as we said, we've covered last week, have no opposites. So just remember that. So depending on what letters you get to each other, the strength of the idgham is going to be different. But the strongest case, we said the makhraj is the same, and the sifa is the same. We'll carry on, brother. We'll go into page 116.
Oh. The 2 similar letters.
Yep.
There are 2 letters which have the same articulation point but differ in some characteristics. So when 2 similar letters meet in the following cases, the first letter being non-vowel, merging is required, as in katabayyana. Idgham of 2 similar letters is limited to 8 cases of their meeting. They are The 8 cases of merging two similar letters. Number 1, Zal into Za, as in is zalamtum. Number 2, Dal into Ta, kat tabayyana. Number 3, Ta into Dal, as in askalat dawa. Number 4, Ta into Ta, as fa'amanat ta'ifatun. Number 5, Lam into Ra. In Al-Fara school of thought, they are similar, as in Kurrabbi. As for Sibawai, Sibawais, to check in Arabic how it pronounced. Sibawai. School of thought is considered as required idgham of two close to each other letters.
Okay. So basically, just before we cover the 8 points, you have to remember the rules. The easiest way to remember them, usually sometimes there's poetry for this, but I would recommend to start off on the poetry. What you'll do is you look at the first letter and look at the second letter that comes behind it. So here, we look at it, you got إذ ظلمتم, you don't say إذ ظلمتم, قد تبين, افتقلت دعوا, and فآمنت طائفة. So you see it merges seamlessly into the next one. And then you got قل ربي. I'm not going to try to confuse you today. I might do it at the end of class maybe, but with regards to what school of thought means, we've covered this at the beginning of class. So you got obviously Al-Farah, in his opinion, he basically let me explain it from the Arabic sense. Basically, he says they are mutajanisain, which means they are from the same category. So that's his opinion. But what happens with obviously Sibawayh, mashallah, he says they're very close with regards to articulation points. For me, I'm not too stressed about the explanation from difference of opinion. As long as you are pronouncing it correctly, that's all that matters. Because both of them, mashallah, they pronounce it exactly the same. It's just they have different justifications when it comes to explaining the type of idgham. What I need you to remember, however, is don't stress about the opinion. Just remember, if you say the lam and the ra, you say qur rabbi. That's what matters. Inshallah, I'll let you carry on to point 6.
Point 6 is Ta into Zal, yalhas zalika.
Yeah, so with this one, you're reading, you don't say yalhath, you don't normally say yalhath dhalik. You'll read it as yalhath dhalik. So I'll get you to read this section and we'll have a question and answer session.
Okay. Although this letter is one of the similar letters, there is a difference between reciters regarding it. For some of them pronounce it with izhar and the rest merge it. According to Hafs, by the way, Shatibiyya, as it pronounced only with idgham. As for the way of Hafs, Taibat Nashr, pronounce it with both izhar and idgham.
Okay,
Number
so
7.
I'll read one more. I'll read point 7 and 8, and then I'm going to ask everybody a question. We'll have a discussion.
Okay. Number 7, Ba into Mim. Arkab Ma'ana. Arkam Ma'ana. This will become recited as. Although this letter is one of the similar letters, there is a difference between reciters regarding it. For some of them, pronounce is with a har and the rest merge it. According to Hafs, by the way of Ash-Shatibiyya, it is pronounced only with idgham. As for the way of Hafs, Taibatun Nash, pronounce it with both izhar and idgham. Number 8, Ta into Ta. It is an incomplete idgham because a stronger letter doesn't enter completely into a weak one. So the Arabs used to merge the non-vowels Ta into Ta while preserving the characteristics of adhesion, at from it, which happens when the reciter closes his or her tongue on a ta with no kalkala, and then he or she removes it from the vowel ta, which occurs in the word of Allah, the Almighty. Like أحطت أحطت
أحط. Yep.
أحطت بسطت فرطتم فرطت
فرطتم.
فرطتم sorry then فرطت.
Yeah. The question is, would anybody would like to comment about why aren't we doing قلقلة on طاء? Because طاء is from قطب جد, the 5 letters, and it has a sukoon on it. So why can't we do what? Well, why can't we do قلقلة in this case?
Because we are not reading that letter. We are reading the next one.
Yes,
Like,
because of idgham. So in this case, you're by saying idgham takes precedence. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, that's correct. Yeah. So basically, this is going to, you'll cover this probably near the end where we start doing more advanced case studies. What happens is that Tajweed basically looks at the facilitating of recitation in order to make things easy. So in this case, as you can see, and you can, as I said in the first lesson, you got 3 criteria for the correct recitation tilawa, and one of them, and you'll see this is it's a major pillar for a reason. Apart from having the correct isnad, and it has to be from the Mus'haf Uthmani, it has to be of the language of the Arabs. The Arabs always looked at ease of pronunciation. So if they can pronounce it easier, it is actually a valid justification. So when you think about it this way, let's look at this logically now. We're talking, let's just say, purely philosophy. أحط and بسطت, it's easier to merge these ones than to say أحطت بسطت. You see what I mean? So do you guys mean about understand what I mean about ease of pronunciation?
Yes.
Yeah. So in this case, what happens? We give this rule. It's like being at an intersection. You give it the right of way. Basically, when a truck is turning, you don't do anything stupid and get your mini to jump out of an intersection in front of it because you're going to get pancaked. Same thing. That's what the sheikh means about itbaq. Itbaq is you got a strong letter and you got the characteristic itbaq. Itbaq and the ta is like the truck and ta is like the mini. It's easier to make traffic flow just to let it flow naturally as opposed to like, let things slide, backwards and forwards. So just remember that there are priorities, and the priorities and the rules are there in place to make it easier for you to pronounce. Which means, and think of it this way, even from a Quran perspective, Allah says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مُدَّكِرٍ. We have made the dhikr recitation or the remembrance easy for recitation. And when we say we've made it easy, we haven't made it easy from the tawkeel and mashallah, the ana that Allah gives you in terms of hidayah and the strength and the energy of getting up and reciting. This also applies to pronouncing it easier. So if you are finding you are struggling excessively or you're struggling for no reason, then it might be a good point to actually look at the justification of recitation and see if you're actually pronouncing it if you're making things difficult for yourself. So that's one thing to remember. We've talked about itbaq, we've talked about point number 8. Now there's actually a bigger question, because the more bullet points that go, mashallah, here the sheikh has given eight examples of letters that you're allowed to merge together, but we haven't had any explanation as to who al-fara is, what's madhab, what's shatibiyya, and what's tariqa tayyib al-nashr. What's a tariqa actually in recitation? Anybody would like to take a guess? Because we've been hearing about tariqa shatibiyya, tayyibat al-nashr. What are we actually even talking about in the book when we talk about these things?
Is it a broad sense of a slight variation of the qira'ah? A different riwayah within the same qira'ah?
Well, not necessarily riwayah. Actually, that's a good point. What is a riwayah? I'm asking everybody at the moment.
A chain of narration.
You could think of it this way. I mean, I'll think of a chain as isnad probably, or this is silsila. Actually, this is actually a good point. I'll probably
like narration, right?
go ahead, bro.
Riwayah is a narration, right?
Yeah, it's a narration. But okay, I mean, what examples can we give of narration?
Maybe the way that we recite.
Yes, yeah, I
Is it
understand. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah. So this is I guess what was your first question?
Actually,
What
yeah,
was
I think I started off talking about what does shatbiyya mean, what's a tariqa, what's
yes,
a riwayah.
Tariqa, the translation of it's just a method of how the authentic scholars or the authentic reciters of the Quran who has been taught by the Sahaba and then the Sahaba have been taught by the Prophet ﷺ for the riwayah, which is the narration of how the Prophet taught his companions and companions taught people, and it become like a chain of narration as the brother mentioned earlier.
Okay, that's actually a good point. I'll probably take a bit of a pause here at the moment before we can carry on, because I'll be asking these. It'll be good to actually write these. If you have, I'll just demonstrate. If you can write this in a pyramid format, like definitions, like starting from the top to the bottom, it might be easiest that way. Because the thing is, because sometimes you might hear mashayikh will be saying, for example, fiqh, and they'll say fiqh linguistically means this, and it means to understand and to comprehend, and that's what it means in the Arabic language. And then they'll say in the lexical meaning, or let's just say, for example, bistilah, or they'll say in context, it refers to the branch of Islamic law that talks about jurisprudence. So basically, here I'm just going to have to do the same thing for qira'ah, so people don't confuse the linguistic meaning with the context meaning. So I'll just double check with everybody. So I'll go through this step by step. So inshallah, we'll start with the basic one. What does isnad or narration mean? Anybody would like to take a guess?
Maybe a teaching style, you could say.
A style, I'll reserve style for tariqa, or
Okay.
sorry,
Yeah.
riwayah, just to make it a bit
Okay.
easier. But I see where you're coming from. Anybody else want to give a shot?
It's the same like chain link like we have for a hadith. Like
Yes,
one narrated this is still till Hazur like Prophet Muhammad.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's
So isnad or narration, just letting everybody know, it's basically when we talk about the isnad, it specifically means the people in the chain. So here, mashallah, the chain has to go back to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That's basically what every ijazah is made up of. When we talk about riwayah, or let's just say qira'ah, what do we normally mean when we say qira'ah? There could be two meanings. There is a general meaning and a specific meaning in Tajweed. What's a qira'ah in both meanings?
Is qira'ah linguistically a recitation, and in like mustalah is one of those chains that we just described?
Yeah, technically it is one of those chains, but like qira'ah, when I say qira'at so and so, I'm actually referring here to the recitation. So there's a difference between recitation and saying the recitation. Because when I say the recitation, I'm talking about a famous imam. You get where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
So are we talking here about the letters?
Yes, basically, yeah. That's what we mean about the qira'ah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here, basically, what happens when we talk about the qira'ah, usually it's attributed. You got the 10 imams now. So in that level of, we're starting off with the generic hierarchy, and now we're going from the top to the bottom. When we talk about qira'ah or an imam in this case, a famous reciter, you've got the famous 10 imams, mashallah. You've got the 7 and the 3 from ad-Durra. So here we're talking about, let's just say, Imam Asim. And Imam Asim, mashallah, had Hafs and Shu'bah. So here basically to differentiate between the two methods that Imam Hafs was Imam Asim was teaching, we'll say this is when we get to another level. We'll talk about riwayah. So riwayah, you got in this case, you've got what makes a qira'ah different from a riwayah? That's actually a good point. They both come from the same isnad, and they both come from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So what's the difference between a riwayah and a qira'ah?
Just to take a guess, so it's not dead silence, Ustad. Is it their interpretation of the riwayah, like what they understood it to mean?
It's technically, you could think of it as their interpretation, but more accurately, it's actually what they were taught. So I'll give you an example. Now, the example that we gave, we said ahattu, right? We said it's difficult. You can't say ahatatu. So when you're teaching a student, what do you teach them? Do you teach ahattu or ahatatu? How would you teach somebody?
Wouldn't you teach them the way the Prophet ﷺ said it?
Yes, you would. Yeah. So, but at that specific point, when I'm teaching that word, and I'm reading, how many, like when I'm reading to you, like I'll read through it once, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I'll say ahattu, and then I'll give you a whole recitation, and I'll say this is a recitation as I heard it from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam from start to finish. So that is, in this case, when Imam Asim was teaching Shu'bah, or he was teaching Hafs, he did exactly to the letter, and he taught it to him, and he said, this is the riwayah there. And the same thing, he did exactly the same thing with Imam Hafs. And what happened, he said, I'll give you an example, like this is actually a practical word now. So he went to Imam Shu'bah, and he said, وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا آيَاتِ اللَّهِ هُزُوءًا. Then he went to the same student, who was basically, when you think about his stepson, more accurately, and he said, وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا آيَاتِ اللَّهِ هُزُوًا. So that's basically called a narration or recitation. They both come from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and some of them have different chains. But what happened at that time is only one word can come out of my mouth. You get what I mean?
No.
Yeah. So because only one word can actually come out of my mouth, I had to stick to one narration that was recited by Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam from start to finish. And not only are the words specific to that recitation, it has a specific set of rules as well. And that's why if you're reading Shu'bah, you'll riwayat Shu'bah more accurately, or the narration of Shu'bah, or the style of Shu'bah. You're like, وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا آيَاتِ اللَّهِ هُزُوءًا. You got, for example, Mikala, you'll say Mikaila. Or let's just say, for example, Jibrila, as well as taught in Hafs. We'll read it as Jabra'ila. So at that time, I could either say Jibreel or Jabra'il, but I can't say both because physically, it doesn't make sense and we know at the time of recitation, at the time it was said, you can't accommodate two at the same time. Narration or riwayah is basically where you get a split, where you get a different style of recitation. Obviously, it doesn't change the meaning necessarily, but at the same time, it probably has a different isnad. But that's when the styles start changing. They start changing at the narration level or the riwayah. So that's when you start hearing differences. Any questions so far? I know this is extremely complicated. Some people will be probably freaking out right now. There's like any questions so far about the different hierarchies?
I'm one of those people freaking out, to be honest.
Oh, good. So, what's the thing that's the difficult for you to process with this one?
Are we talking about the scholars, which in this case they are the reciters, and then this is as a qira'ah, and then we are talking about their student as a riwayah. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, yeah. So we're trying to like split it up right now. So basically, we're getting really specific. So when we read this next time in the book, we know exactly what they're talking about in the book. So, for example, you're not going to understand tariqah if you don't know what a riwayah or qira'ah is. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do. But no, jazakallah khair, you got it. Any other questions so far before we start getting in depth?
So is the riwayah the love or the words that the Prophet ﷺ spoke?
Oh yes, all the words the Rasul ﷺ spoke, you can trace them back to Rasul ﷺ. The reason why we say Imam Hafs or Imam Shu'bah or Asim or Warsh, for example, is mashallah, these guys became famous in a style that Rasul ﷺ used to recite. So, for example, Imam Shafi'i is famously known to read Basmala and Fatiha. That's one thing that he does, and he has his own fiqh rules because of it. You got Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. He became famous in his practice of fiqh, and his school of thought, which is probably more dominant right now, is not to recite Fatiha and recitation. So we'll say this guy's Hanbali madhab or Hanafi madhab, not because ma'adallah this existed at the time of the Sahaba. It didn't exist at the time of the Sahaba. But mashallah, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal or Imam Malik got so good at doing one thing that Rasul did, he basically became the go-to person about teaching you a certain way the Rasul used to, for example, fast. Just like how you have the same thing for fiqh, you had the same thing for qira'at, mashallah. Because mashallah, one guy got really good at reciting the Quran one way, Rasul used to say, recite. And same thing with the other person. And that's how they became famous. So all the qira'at go back to Rasul. They are part of their school of thought. The reason if we say Shu'bah or Hafs, it doesn't mean they're not back to Rasul. They actually are authentic. They go back to Rasul. It's just that, mashallah, Imam Hafs had his specific way of teaching and his unique style of basically explaining the rules of Tajweed. And that's what made him, you could say, famous in that regard. But yeah, everything goes back to Rasul. Definitely.
I have a question. Like, are you saying now that the qira'ah was like an authentic way of teaching the Quran, and the riwayah was the teachers of that, the student of that teacher, they had their own style of teaching, which does not conflict with the rules of Tajweed and the rules of Sharia. And this is why it was accepted. Is that what?
Oh no, I'm not saying that. This is a difference between. I know where you're coming from, though. This is a difference between fiqh and Quran. Subhanallah. Okay. This is what's really unique. So when it came to fiqh, for example, you have a famous faqih. Let's just say, for example, Imam Abu Hanifa. Now we know he had a lot of students, and mashallah, some of them, especially the most famous ones, they ended up not only interpreting the ahkam differently, but some of them even changed the fiqh rulings afterwards. You can trace them back to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But mashallah, you have the likes of Abu Yusuf, who spread the madhab, so to speak. He basically wasn't 100% copy of Abu Hanifa, but he was inspired and he interpreted correctly according to the Quran and Sunnah, as Abu Hanifa did. You could say the same thing with Imam Shafi'i. Imam Shafi'i, and they're all students of each other, by the way. Imam Shafi'i, actually, he studied from Imam Malik. He was his top student. Then, subhanAllah, he migrated over to Egypt and learned from Layth bin Sa'd. And basically, when you think about it, he ended up being a hybrid between both of them. So he ended up interpreting fiqh based on his teachers that he learned. That's how fiqh works. And all of it is valid. And that's why, we tell people there's definitely more than 4 madhabs. There's just 4 became famous. There's a difference between fiqh and the fuqaha. I use it as an example, but fiqh, the way they derive the rules is completely different from qira'at. Fiqh, basically, we derive it from Quran and Sunnah is classified in different hadiths. You get the strong and the weak narrations, and mashallah, all of them say, if the hadith is 100%, it's part of my method. We understand it. And they have different classifications. It's weak and it's strong and whatnot. Qira'ah, on the other hand, it has to be 100% from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It's non-negotiable. So it doesn't mean they interpreted it differently. They received it from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and that is exactly how he read. But when he read in that style, he had different sets of rules. And all of it is from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And that's why when, it's like, obviously it hasn't been changed. When you look at the Mus'haf, it's exactly the same how it's recited. It's just a different way of doing it. So we're putting, the way we actually just find out if something is authentic is basically, we tend to compare things to things that we already know. Like, it's good to compare qira'at to fiqh. As an example, I'll say this is a madhab here and a madhab in fiqh. However, you have to understand, fiqh is a completely different branch of Islamic studies to qira'at. When I talk about madhab in fiqh, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same way or exactly the same as a madhab in qira'at, because they're completely different. The way we actually look for evidence is different in qira'at, because qira'at, it has to be 100%, and the criteria is a lot higher. While in fiqh, the criteria doesn't have to be as strict. You get what I mean? So
Yes,
it's, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. And so we can say that there's the 10 different qira'at, and then within those there are the sorry, what's the word I'm looking for, that they differ? The turuq.
Yes, exactly, yes. So basically, if you're going through qira'at, we have 10 famous narrations. And the 10 famous narrations, and subhanAllah, the questions you guys are asking me are exactly what the students asked their teacher. And mashallah, I kid you not, they were exactly in the same situation. I can't remember, I think it was Hafs or Shu'bah, because they were both contemporaries of each other. They lived around the same time. And they asked their teacher, subhanAllah, Asim at one point. They said, "Oh, I hear that you teach my brother differently when I recite." And Asim went back and said to basically his student, he said, "By Allah, I'm teaching you exactly as I heard it from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But you have to understand, when I'm reading something to you, like right now I'm talking, when I'm talking to you, my style is either going to say, I am going to the park, or I'm gonna go to the park. Can I say I'm gonna go to the park? You get what I mean?
Understood, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, that's when people can come up to you and say, oh, yes, the guy that uses the word gonna is known to be more relaxed. For example, they'll say, this is an informal street gang used, let's just say, on the West Coast. And the more formal guy, let's just say, that wears a suit and a tie, is always going to say going to. But when they're reading and when they're talking to you normally, they're not going to say, I'm going to. It doesn't make sense. at that point, and that's where the narrations change, you have to either pick one or the other. You see what I mean?
Can you? I've got a just a side question. If can you use them? You can't use them both. Like say in one occasion you say I'm gonna, and then later on if the same thing come again, you can say I'm going to.
That's a really good point. So subhanAllah, that's what makes an accent or a dialect different from recitation. You see what I mean? Because accent, you can copy someone's accent, you can learn a few words, you can mix and match whatever you want, because that's street talk. But recitation is a practiced method that has to be in line with a set of rules that cannot change. For example, if I'm being an actor and my job is to act let's just say a specific, I have to do a British accent. I'm going to be a really bad actor if I start the conversation in a British uptown accent and I finish in an Australian slang accent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what makes dialects different from recitations. Subhanallah, same thing applies for qira'at. And that's exactly, when you think about it, when Imam Hafs was doing when he was teaching his students. When he was teaching Shu'bah, for example, I'll give you an example between Shu'bah and Hafs. When he was teaching Hafs, he was saying, وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا آيَاتِ اللَّهِ هُزُوًا. For Shu'bah, he had to say هُزُوًا. For فِي بُيُوتٍ أَذِنَ اللَّهُ أَن تُرْفَعَ, it was بُيُوت. When he said it, Imam Hafs, which is our Imam, Shu'bah, he said biyut. So these are the minor ones. And then you got other ones like Jabara'ila, Jibreel. So when you look at it, or even idgham, we're doing idgham right now. When you're reading ittakhadhtum, Shu'bah, his idgham even is different. He'll say ittakhadhtum. You see where I'm coming from? So it's just like how in accents, when you pick up certain words, you'll hear certain words and go, yeah, that's definitely this guy. This is exactly how Khalid talks, or Muhammad talks. The same thing happens with Tajweed. This is exactly how Shu'bah talks. This is exactly how Hafs talks. And you can't mix and match between them. And they stick strictly to their own dialects and recitations, or riwayah, because that is what they're famous for. They don't copy from one another. You know what I mean?
Okay, Sheikh, please let me know if this is just going too far or this is off topic. But those sab'a huruf, we don't know one completely, do we? We can't say that this recitation is that harf and this recitation is that harf, and there's 7 of them, and the other 3 are a mix of them all, or something like that.
That's actually a good question, because mashallah, the reason why we're doing this, I do apologize if it seems really heavy for some of you guys. That's why we need to ask questions and answers. The hadith specifically talks about the 7 ahruf. That's all we kind of know. And the reason why you need to know this is because there's no way you can teach Tajweed and a student comes up to you and goes, oh, bro, I heard the Quran being recited differently. Can you please justify a position? Because if you don't know how to explain these fundamental questions to Tajweed, basically your qira'ah is going to collapse. It's basically, how do you know what you're reciting is false or not? So here, bro, going back to your question, can you just say the question again? Because I'm going to highlight the really key point that you said.
My one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we, do we have one harf, one dialect that we can say this recitation is that harf, and then this recitation comes from that dialect, and that's the complete dialect there in that recitation?
Yeah, so at the moment, we have the 10 famous recitations. And the question I'd like to ask, and I'll ask you guys, because we said arkan al-tilawa are based on 3 things. How do you know if a tilawa is correct or authentic, more accurately? What were the arkan al-tilawa? We said the 3 criteria.
That the common Arab must be able to understand it?
Yeah, it has to be in the language of the Arabs, and the common Arab has to understand it. Yeah, so it has to be in pure Arabic. Yeah, that's number 1. Number 2.
It has to be according to the rules of the reciter. Sorry. Scratch that one.
Oh, so it has to be exactly the same as it was from the Uthmani Mus'haf. Even it says in Arabic, ولو احتمالا, even it has to be exactly the same or close enough to the actual Uthmani script. It can't be anything else. That's the Uthmani script written by Uthman himself. You get what I mean?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Because we said there has to be a hard copy backing it up. It's not just recitation. Yeah. That's number 2.
Is it like not to add or take cancel any letters?
Sorry?
Not to add or cancel any letters when you recite. Some reciters, they add a letter or you might change the meaning.
Oh yeah, that's part of the Arabic criteria. It has to be make sense in average Arab. Yeah, so that covers it. Like even if a haraka or something was off, it doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Yep. So it's the 3rd criteria. We said it had to be tawatur. You guys remember what tawatur was? The first lesson.
Trace back to the Prophet ﷺ.
Oh no, but it has to be tawatur means it's not sahih. Sahih. Oh, okay. Let's just say mashhur. Mashhur for hadith has to have 3 or 4 different chains of narration. People in the tabaqa saying this is authentic. Tawatur means way above that. So it means we're talking hundreds of people, we're talking literally heaps of people in the chain that are actually confirming that it's 100% authentic. So I'm not saying 1 or 2 people or 3 even. Tawatur means basically nations of people that have recited this thing to the point that we can say this is safely, we're assuming that it's 100% correct. So you can see, as we said, that's why we know it's 100% correct. We have physical evidence, we have recitation evidence from not just 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 narration. It has to be, tawatur means a lot in order to qualify, and it has to be in the language of the Arabs. So that's why we know it's 100% authentic, and the ones that we managed to get are 10. And from them you have different variations. The reason why this doesn't make sense to some of you guys is because you haven't seen the non-authentic recitations. There are non-authentic recitations, and these can be found, mashallah, in there's books written about them. We don't teach this as part of this syllabus. And basically, some of them they were passed down to us. Some of them even have Sahaba's names in them that I mentioned. But the reason we don't recite them today is because basically they either lacked, you could say, reciters or didn't meet some of the really strict requirements. So that's basically why. So yes, it's the ones that we have today are basically 10, and from them they have the different variations. So basically you have the 10 qira'at, then you have the riwayah, which is basically the different, that's when they start sounding different, and then tariqa, which is the minute differences. So just before I move on, are there any questions so far about what we did?
I have like just clarification here I wanted to ask about. So
Sure.
Again, all of these letters or all of these qira'at, they are authentic by the Prophet ﷺ. And the aim of them just to make it easy for everyone to be able to recite the Quran, right?
Yes.
Yes. So when we talk about the qira'ah and when we talk about the riwayah, so are we talking here about when some of the students are trying to learn the qira'ah and because of their background, because of their accent and the way they learn, so that made me just think about when you mentioned about one of the recitals. There was 2 brothers, they were trying to learn the Quran, and one of them discovered that he was taught the Quran a little or different to his brother, and then he questioned his teacher, right?
Yep.
So is it because of the way that the student learn and the way that...
Yes, it's not because of the way a student learn. So now what happens is that what you'll find out later on, mashallah, and when you start looking at qira'at as a science, because once you step outside of, you get one ijazah and you start doing other ijazat, you're going to find out, mashallah, that some of these qura'at, mashallah, they actually had other qira'at. Like, mashallah, have a Kisa'i, mashallah, he knew more than one. And he was actually a student for a lot of sheikhs. But he became famous for his style of al-Kisa'i, which is the one that he did. But mashallah, it's not because they couldn't study and they couldn't understand or it was their interpretation. It was basically a style they received from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and they became so good at it, they became famous. That's basically it.
Sheikh, mumkin, can I ask another question just while we're on this topic?
Yeah.
So say you pick a random ayah or a random page of the Quran, and you'll have, 10 different recitation styles, and then within that you'll have different riwayah and different turuq. So there might be like 20 or 30 variations to read that one page.
Well, technically not really. Like, I'll give you an example right now. So when you think about it, there's 10 famous reciters, and we say there's a hadith, and this confuses people. Wait a minute, there's 10 famous recitations and 7 letters. Clearly, there's a contradiction. Am I right?
On the face value, it seems to not make sense, yeah?
Yes. I see where you're coming from. It seems to contradict. So when you think about it, some words in Arabic, like I said, you can't, like, you could possibly, from a mathematical perspective, yes, if you try to swap everything around, you can get heaps of variations. However, when you look at it from an usul perspective, and that's why when you study qira'at, you have to study the usul of the qira'at, then you study the specifics before you move on to another one. Sometimes it's not as drastic as it is. For example, Al-Fatiha. Al-Fatiha, we know, like the second ayah, third ayah, you got Maliki Yawmiddin. You basically have two. You have Maliki Yawmiddin, and then you have the majority of Qur'an, if I'm correct, from memory, they say Maliki Yawmiddin. But between whether it's the 10 famous Qur'at or the 7 narrations, you can only say it in two, in the language of the Arabs and the way we found it on Mus'haf. It's either Maliki or Maliki. You get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, yep.
So when you think about it, it doesn't mean like there's exactly 35 or I don't know how many variations. Mathematically, that would make sense from a math perspective. However, we don't receive it mathematically. We don't do our own ijtihad as we do with the schools of thought or fiqh to a certain extent. The primary driver behind it, because when you think about it, ijtihad is probably the aim of what we do in fiqh, because once you learn usul fiqh or you learn the madahib, you learn ijtihad, so that by the time Islam spreads after 1,500 years and the times change, you'll at least be able to apply the rules of the Quran to go, okay, let's make knowledge halal or haram. That's the main aim of fiqh. However, when it comes to recitation is all about receiving from the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. If it's not from the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it doesn't have the right isnad, it doesn't make sense in Arabic, then it's not a recitation, or it's a false recitation.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh. And I just have one last request.
Go ahead.
Could you give us an example of like the recitation, the riwayah, and the turuq?
Okay.
Like just say Hafs. So Hafs was the qira'ah, and then the riwayah was, Shu'bah, I'm just guessing, and then the turuq, etc.
Yes. So now this is what we're getting at where the book is at the moment. You got, for example, let's start off with the Imam Asim. Imam Asim has 2 students. He had 2 distinct styles that he specifically learned from, and he's passing him down to the students along with the tariqas and everything else. So recitation-wise, he had to split the recitation because the differences are so big, it had to be learned under a different style of narration or riwayah. So Shu'bah became famous in his one. And for example, I'll give you again Surah Al-Baqarah. You got ittakhadhtum. Now you got Hafs said ittakhadhtum. Shu'bah said ittakhadhtum. His rules of idgham are different to the rules of Hafs, as per the book, as you can see. Another one, he had a really specific one. The word was different. You got huzu'ah and you got huzu'ah. That's the difference between Hafs and Shu'bah. Another one you got And this is specific words. Bismillah. إن تبدوا الصدقات فنعما هي. فنعما هي is Hafs. Shu'bah had two. He had فنعما هي, and then had فنعما هي. إن تبدوا الصدقات فنعما هي. When you look at this one, the ayn had اختلاس. I didn't say فنعما هي. I said and I made عي short. فنعما هي. But he had two. He said فنعما هي. And for those Arabs and who were born Arabs, they can relate to me. When somebody says, "Oh, I come from so and so tribe," and he's trying to show off, and the guy is actually impressed, what do you see say in Arabic? He says "والنعم." Am I right?
No.
Like,
Yeah.
so when you think about it, in Arabic, even after all these thousands of years, this word still makes sense. But you got mashallah in classical Arabic, you can say as ni'imma, you can say ni'mah, ni'm. So that's basically the difference in the ruwayah. Tariqa, this is where it gets different. And this is exactly what the Sheikh's talking about in the book. You got Shatibiyya and you got Tayyibat al-Nashr. We'll explain these in details, but we said the pioneers of al-Isnad when it came to Tajweed, mashallah, it's the great Imam al-Jazari. And he, mashallah, he's the one that discovered the extra three. And he basically was, you can think of it as a later student. He came 300 years after Imam Shatibi. Imam Shatibi compiled everything into 7. Imam Jazari compiled everything. He compiled the 10, and he added extra information on the existing 7. So, mashallah, we can say he kind of completed the work of Imam al-Jazari. So he tends to have a lot more. Basically, with the correct isnad, this gets really technical, but it is very subtle differences. You got, for example, in Shu'ban, let's just say Hafs. Hafs has 2 tariqas when it comes to mad. You'll have, for example, one that says all the mad. إلى هؤلاء. That's Shatibiyya. In Tayyibat Nashr, you read it as إلى هؤلاء. Shatibiyya, they read all the mad. So say يا أيها الذين آمنوا. Again, using a different tariqa, but within the same style of Hafs, they'll say يا أيها الذين آمنوا. And they have their own justification in Arabic. You'll break it down the grammatical rules. They'll say ya is basically harf nida, so technically it's not one complete word, and that's fair enough. So that's how you get the differences. So what I'm trying to say is the narrations, you have the 10 different imams. The qira'ah is different. It's basically an accent. Narration is when you start hearing differences. Tariqa is a specific subset. So tariqa can only happen in a narration, and it's usually a minor variation. Is, for example, tariqa is a different way. For example, let's just say when you order pizza, you can only have 2 different tariqas, or actually maybe 3. You can have deep pan, you could have cheese stuffing at the end, or you could have extra crispy. You guys need to know what I mean?
Yes, alhamdulillah, and may Allah reward you, Sheikh, so you deserve a cup of tea after this class. May Allah accept you.
No, Jazakallah khair. So it's so what we're doing here is the reason why we had to do this is to actually explain to you different classifications when we're talking about a qira'ah or a narration. Like, for example, when I'm talking about tariqa specifically applies to one narration that's under a different class of recitations. But if I say, for example, let's just say Asim, it could be anything. Which recitation? Are you talking Shu'bah? Are you talking so and so? Same thing happens for Muhammad. Same thing could happen for Warsh. Sometimes, for example, you'll find like when it comes to Khalaf al-Ashir, he's basically the 10th Imam from the 10th Qurra. You'll find he doesn't have any students that are different. I'm not going to get into the debates here, but basically he doesn't have 2 guys or one person specifically that he gave him everything. It's just one variation altogether. So it's understanding the level of depth and the hierarchy that you're in is going to make you understand where they're coming from. Then the very last thing you get, and it's not really applicable, you can't really do this until you've finished and you've done a PhD basically, and you've become famous, is an opinion. And that's when you get Al-Faraq, for example, saying, oh yeah, my opinion is this. Sibawayh might say something else different. But the difference between the difference of opinion and qira'ah is that they can't be different. The recitation has to sound the same. But for fiqh, they can be different because it's based on interpretation. You don't have that freedom to interpret things when it comes to tajweed, as we said, because you're receiving what you're told by your sheikh. So I hope.
Sheikh, I just while you were explaining that, I was just looking to one of the examples that under the al-harfan al-mutajanisan, and there was like just an example of the ayah irkab ma'na or irkam ma'na. I just remember that I was watching like a video of a sheikh was explaining and reciting in a way that it makes you see the scenario of what happened in that ayah. So he made us imagine that when Prophet Noah, he was telling his son to jump on the ship, and the water is coming, and they are in a danger. He said, like, imagine that you were there, and then you were telling someone to hurry up, and then to tell him like, irkab ma'ana, and he was like, kind of say it in a rush, irkam ma'ana, right?
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah, look at that, subhanallah. So the way he said it, so basically maybe this is related to what a tariqa and a riwayah mean, just to make it easy for us to recite and understand and feel the meaning of the ayah. Is that related? I feel like it's related. Like, I'm not sure if you
mashallah,
yeah,
mashallah, it's not necessarily just tariqa. Tariqa basically is the different is their tariqa of explaining the hukum. But mashallah, I know where you're coming from. Like it happens between different qira'at, mashallah. Different qira'at, just like how mashallah they emphasize different riwayat and different parts of the Quran. And mashallah, you do get a different meaning and feeling out of it, mashallah. Not completely different. It shows you a different side of it, meaning of it, mashallah. Like I can't remember off the top of my head if it was I can't remember the name at the moment, but here you got I'll give you an example of you got Hafs صوت الإسراء اللهم صل على محمد وكل إنسان ألزمناه طائره في عنقه ونخرج له يوم القيامة كتابا يلقاه منشورا. You got another one, and this is completely different. وكل إنسان ألزمناه طائره في عنقه ويوم القيامة اللهم صل على محمد كتابا ويخرج له يوم القيامة كتابا يلقاه منشورا. So basically here you got يلقاه, he sees his book, he's going to receive his book on the day of judgment, he'll see his book, will be presented to. And another one says you'll be presented, but mashallah, it'll be dictated upon you exactly what you've done. Mashallah, in terms of meaning, both the qira'ahs are correct. In terms of, mashallah, understanding the atmosphere, they give you a different perspective. Some things you're going to see your amal on the day of judgment, but some amal that will be recited upon you. On this day did this, on this day did this. Like an interrogation, subhanAllah. يلقاه, you'll see. يلقاه منشوره. It says, نخرج, we will bring out to him a book. It says, يخرج, it will be brought forward to him. So, mashallah, when you look at it from a tafsir perspective, that's why the major mufassirin, they all need to have at least a PhD in Arabic and understand all the 10 qira'at. Because, mashallah, it gets you a more complete meaning of the thing, mashallah. And just like how it helps you with tafsir, it helps you with actually feeling, mashallah, the situation. You got the 6 harakat mad. You got, for example, Allah now, Sayyid, astaghfirullah azim. You got Fir'aun basically saying, I've believed in the ilah of Musa. Allah saying, al-ana, mad 6 harakat. Oh, right now you decided to actually become a Muslim. Well, obviously, too late. So, mashallah, you could see some of these things, mashallah, they highlight the way that we naturally speak, mashallah. And mashallah, as my sheikh used to say, mashallah, Sheikh Ibrahim Nuskur Bkhair, before our communication got cut off between Gaza, he's saying that some feelings you can only get from certain narrations. When he was teaching the students Qira'at Ya'qub, he was basically saying, this is the only Qira'ah that gets you to understand this meaning and this feeling. So, mashallah, it's like, when you think about it, it's a miracle that you're getting different recitations that not only are they authentic, but they don't contradict with one another. They complete each other in meaning. And mashallah, if this isn't a miracle, I don't know what it is, So it's, yeah, you're 100% on the money there, brother Wasim. Jazakallah khair for putting this example forward.
وياكم إن شاء الله.
Because it applies not just for tariqah, it applies for riwayah as well. Because riwayah, not only do you have different ways of reciting it, you even have different words for altogether, you could say. Or different, not different words, but you could say, we call them furush, that you're being introduced to.
I always wanted to ask about the first ayah of Surah Al-Baqarah, Alif Lam Mim, and then ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين, or ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. It's just like it makes you like has two different meaning, two different understanding, but the meaning is one.
Exactly, yes. And that's why, obviously, if somebody comes in and they have a different, as we say in Arabic, like tariqah or something else, like, oh yeah, it's like as long as it's within the school of thought and the recitation, I'll pass them. So it's, and you guys heard the same thing in the practical class on Sundays. Like, if people are reciting, they'll have a different narration of Hafs. I'm happy with that. My job is, as long as you're reading Hafs correctly, I have to let you go through. But if you jump out of Hafs, even if you're reading a word that's correct, like takhattum, I hear this sometimes a lot with Moroccan brothers. I'll go, that's perfectly fine, as long as if you're reading, I don't know, if you're reading Shu'bah, if you're reading Warsh, astaghfirullah, not Warsh, I haven't done Warsh. But if you're doing Khalaf, that's perfectly fine. It's a valid word, but not for Hafs. And mashallah, that's the beauty of Qira'at, mashallah. It actually helps expand your tafsir, not just in terms of understanding, but also feeling as well. Alhamdulillah. I really apologize for dragging this lesson out, but I had to actually say it because it's been in the background for a while. And I was worried somebody's going to come up to you guys and say, oh yeah, explain this simple question to me. It's difficult. It's a heavy subject, but now you understand what the Sheikh's talking about when he talks about a madhab or a tariqah, or, it's like different riwayah. So at least we're on the same page, inshallah.
جزاكم الله خير.
Inshallah. I think it's been a heavy lesson today. Inshallah, what we'll do, we'll probably finish off on, we'll start, inshallah, the next lesson on page 20. I think it's a perfect stop. So basically, we've covered the basics of idram. We've covered the complex idram, the reasons why you want to make idram if something sounds similar. Alhamdulillah, we had a really good introduction as well as to, obviously, how idram applies and how it relates to the makhraj and the articulation point. And inshallah, we talked about the identical one, and we'll start talking, as we're going to go through the lessons next week, we'll start talking about the weaker levels of idram as we go, before inshallah we move into the next lessons, because I think this is basically inshallah we'll be finished idram next week. So what I want you to do next week, you should be able to explain idram in general, how to do it, advanced idram, and different classification of idram before we start on inshallah the next class. So any more questions so far with anybody with regards to merging letters or qira'at or anything in general? Don't worry, we'll try to revise them next week, inshallah. So no questions about what the tariqah is, what the riwayah is, what the qira'ah is, anything in general?
Maybe this one for the next session, inshallah, about what the difference between al-mutajanisan and al-mutaqariban, al-mutamathilan. Like, to me, like they're all close to each other, but yeah, there'll be something that make me, just notice the difference right away when I first heard it.
Inshallah, we'll cover it in detail next week. But mashallah, I think we only provided one example for this week. It's like متماثلين. متماثلين basically for their exact. So يكتب بينهم. The reason why we say it's متماثلين or is exactly the same is because the sifa and the makhraj is exactly the same. You'll get one, for example, where the makhraj is close, but the sifa is nearly identical. So inshallah, next week we'll go through the different classifications. I just gave you the strongest one today because it's easy to understand. And then we decided to make sure we've covered everything we know about the qira'at and riwayah before we move on, inshallah. Next week is going to be pretty easy. It's a straightforward lesson. You'll just learn the other three, inshallah. And the differences, yeah, like you said, they're not really that major. It's just when you get asked this for exam in Tajweed or Ijaza, like, for example, what's the difference between, is this one stronger than this one? You can say yes or no. That's basically it. So Jazakallah khair, man. We'll give examples and details, inshallah, with the examples next week, inshallah.
Looking forward to it. Jazakallah khair.
No, Jazakallah khair, man. Appreciate your feedback today.
Jazakallah khair. Barakallah.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Ajma'in, guys, really appreciate it. You guys definitely put forward really intelligent questions, but it's like, that's why I tell brothers, like, at the end of the day, like, when somebody turns up to me and tries to teach at the academy or whatever, and be like, oh, brother, but I'm a hafiz. I'm like, brother, my job isn't to train a hafiz. Because, mashallah, you guys can see how difficult it is. It's like, if you're a true hafiz of the Quran, not only will you actually memorize it, you'll actually protect it and defend it. Because, the last thing you need is an Orientalist coming from 22-year-old guy coming from philosophy class, destroying everything we learned about the Quran. And mashallah, you guys are basically the pioneers that I personally see that are doing this in New Zealand at the moment. It's a very unique course that we're doing. And mashallah, may Allah increase you guys in knowledge and strength to do with this. My phone is always on me. You know what to do. Click me any messages if you have any questions throughout the week. And obviously, inshallah, like, because, I'm more than happy to answer any single question. Because, like I said, if I don't do this correctly, if I don't know anything when I'm supposed to go and ask my sheikh as well. So it's a big responsibility. So I'm more than happy to answer anything. But Jazakallah khair, guys. You guys are asking all the right questions. I really appreciate it.